Here in Los Angeles, we've been dealing with a dangerous crisis of foreign entities flooding our city, taking jobs from hardworking people, making our streets their home, and putting our children at risk. I'm of course talking about robot taxis. Waymo, or the artist formerly known as the Google self-driving car project, recently rolled out service in most of the city. And when it debuted in my neighborhood, the streets were almost instantly full of these cars. And on a walk around the block one day, I had to explain to my confused toddler why a car without a driver was sort of looking at us as we crossed the street. And I can't stop thinking about how the continued encroachment of big tech, and especially automated technologies in formerly public spaces, feels like the beginning of the end of public space as we know it. It's like we're entering a new era where all space is privately owned and operated. Now, what's even more upsetting than this is that there is a direct connection between things like robot taxis and the coming wave of tech authoritarianism that aims to replace democratic systems with some hellish mix of startup-style monarchy and techno-feudalism. Much of what's being sold to us as innovative solutions in products like Waymo and ChatGPT run the risk of becoming new mechanisms of surveillance and control. And they're all motivated by an anti-democratic philosophical vision shared by the least chill guys on the planet. So today I want to talk about how we got here, the philosophy and ideology behind it, and how we might still have a small chance of fighting back. And because I'm committed to living my raps, I'm filming this video from the back of a Waymo that's currently on its way to a very important and potentially dangerous destination, but we will cross that bridge when we get to it. Now, this car represents one of the ways in which Silicon Valley innovation is furthering the decay of democracy, at least here in God's country. Now, we can start with one of the most obvious reasons that these things kind of suck. They're the consummation of a decades-long project to turn full-time workers into gig-working independent contractors and then replace those human gig workers with various forms of automated technology, all of which turns the precarious workers into unemployed people. Now, I'm not going to get into all of this right now, but to me at least, it seems not good that Silicon Valley continues to find ways to both destroy existing jobs and exploit pre-existing labor. But hey, it's not like AI could ever make YouTube videos, so I'm safe. And even if they could, it's not like YouTube would let that happen. You know, they'd moderate stuff so the platform wasn't completely taken over by a bunch of AI slop produced by people just hoping to make money off the least amount of effort. That would never happen. Now, on an aesthetic level, driverless taxis and delivery robots make our cities feel more dystopian, with corporately owned and controlled autonomous vehicles rolling out in more and more cities. We'll say though, it's very pleasant in here. It's a comfortable ride. You know, I'm not complaining thus far. Good temperature. To risk being naive, it leaves me wondering how all of this happened, or to put it differently, who let this happen? Because it feels like a small group of individuals working in Silicon Valley decided that this is something that was good without consulting the rest of us. And then our state and local politicians agreed with the Silicon Valley guys without asking us what we thought. Now we're forced to share the sidewalk with delivery robots that have human names, and our roads with cars that are also automated snitches. More on that in a little bit. At bare minimum, it seems like there should be at least some democratic mechanism by which residents of cities are able to vote on whether they agree to take on the physical and existential risk implied by letting companies like Waymo introduce new technologies like this into their cities. Now, some states have already dealt with this in advance. In Texas, they passed a bill in 2017, and that bill includes a provision that in the future, citizens cannot put forward ballot measures to get rid of or interfere with automated vehicles. Oh, I don't like when it does the little turns. Oh, we're switching lanes. First lane switch. And it all points to how disappointing technological innovation has become, where the supposed brightest minds on the planet are changing the world with robot taxis and, apps that can do plagiarism for teenagers. Now, as one social theory PhD writes in his book, The Technological Republic, a generation of founders cloaked themselves in the rhetoric of lofty and ambitious purpose. Indeed, their rallying cry to change the world has grown lifeless from overuse, but often raised enormous amounts of capital and hired legions of talented engineers merely to build photo sharing apps and chat interfaces for the modern consumer. In the same book, this author quotes David Graeber as asking, "Where, in short, are the flying cars? Where are the force fields, tractor beams, teleportation pods, anti-gravity sleds, tricorders, immortality drugs, colonies on Mars, and all the other technological wonders any child growing up in the mid to late 20th century assumed would exist by now?" For many, including those on the left, Technological innovation was going to serve humanity and free us from the limits of traditional labor. But in reality, the goals of Silicon Valley seem to have little to do with furthering humanity and much more to do with furthering our status as consumers to be mined for our money, our data, and our time. Now, this is why the authors of The Technological Republic ask where things went wrong. And one of their answers is that we stopped taking seriously the classical philosophical question of aiming for the good, something which could orient our life and our values. In the book, they write that the reluctance of several generations of educators in particular, but also our political and business leaders, to venture into a discussion about the good as opposed to merely the right has left a gap that risks being filled by others, demagogues from both the left and the right. And the car that I'm currently riding in represents this empty vision of the future in which technology is solely driven by efficiency and profit, even when it's at the expense of our own humanity. And we see this in the shallowness of a lot of the early discussion about the ethics of self-driving cars. It often boils down to people just putting a new gloss on the trolley problem, which if you know me, you know I hate. But this obscures the much more immediate dilemma of how these technologies might be making our world less democratic and way more controlled. Philosopher Andre Gores actually wrote about the social ideology of the car back in the 1970s. In this essay, he argues that mass motoring affects an absolute triumph of bourgeois ideology on the level of daily life. It gives and supports in everyone the illusion that each individual can seek his or her own benefit at the expense of everyone else. Take the cruel and aggressive selfishness of the driver who at any moment is figuratively killing the others who appear merely as physical obstacles to his or her own speed. The whole essay is worth reading. I also realize now that according to that logic, this car is an automated death machine, so that feels cool. Where Gores was already writing about how the private ownership of cars was ruining society and creating its own ideology of isolated bourgeois individualism, contemporary academic Neil McBride argues that driverless cars are just putting the nails in the coffin of democracy. He writes that there's a reason why governments are so keen on driverless cars, and it's not just because of the potential economic benefits. They offer the chance for even greater tracking and even control of citizens' every move. Far from setting us free, driverless cars threaten to help enable new forms of surveillance and oppression. McBride imagines a future where all taxis are automated, and as such, huge swaths of commuting can be tracked, monitored, and controlled by private corporations and even the government. He offers one example of what would happen if a massive anti-government protest was planned, and the driverless taxis and cars were simply made unavailable that day. In another scenario, we can also imagine riders being tracked to gather information on who may or may not be participating in political gatherings or protests deemed uncouth by the state. And this is especially relevant right now when the current administration has talked about a forthcoming all-out attack on the radical left. McBride concludes that in reflecting on the ethics of driverless cars, we need to move beyond the constraints of trolleys and levers to a wider agenda that addresses the concepts of autonomy, community, transparency, identity, value, and empathy. Our ethical debate has to address the power shifts, the political responsibilities, and the human rights that our vision of driverless cars may require to be sacrificed. Basically, when we give up our streets to driverless cars like this one, we need to then consider the power that we're giving to big tech, and ultimately the government, and what it means when our cities grow more and more automated. It all embodies a pretty soulless vision of the future, where public goods become private services, where citizens fully transition into their final form as pure consumers, and where those without the means to consume are without the rights to really exist in this society. Oh, we're passing my favorite bar in LA. Shout out the I've met some of you guys there before. If you've never been there before, don't go there. We don't want to jam the spot up or anything. If you do go there and you see me, buy me a High Life, please. But it's more than just automated taxis and delivery robots encroaching our streets and public spaces, as similar technologies are also creeping their way into our homes, our phones, and maybe our brains. Now, while at the time that I'm filming this, a Waymo has not directly killed anybody, another increasingly ubiquitous and way more accessible new technology kind of has. And I'm going to talk about that once I get back home. But come back, because after that we should be at our final destination. And if you think you have any idea where I am going right now, let me know in the comments. And if you guess it right, I'll give you a reward or say, good job. So something that you can't help but think about when riding around town in a robot taxi is how much of our data and information is out there being used and traded by various companies and weird dark web accounts to track us and sell us things and potentially exploit us. The reality of the situation is that our personal data is just everywhere on the internet. And the number of data breaches, which make our data vulnerable to very uncool dudes, is rising every year. According to the annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, it went up by 211% from 2023 to 2024, due mainly to 5 mega breaches. And if you're neurotic and anxious like me, this is the stuff that keeps you up at night, which is why I've really loved using this video sponsor, Incogni. Now, Incogni tracks down and removes your data from multiple websites, including online directories, people search sites, and commercial databases. The process is fully automated for hundreds of known data brokers, i.e. companies that collect and sell your data without your consent. And because data can reappear on these sites, Incogni repeatedly removes it for you. They also have a custom removal feature to take down almost everything exposed about you online. You just send them a link and your dedicated privacy expert will handle it for you. Now, if you've ever Googled yourself, and I mean, who among us hasn't done that? You've likely found your info on some weird website. So next time this happens, you just get that link, you send it to your dedicated privacy expert, and they'll take care of it. This all helps reduce the risk of scams. It protects your online and offline privacy and lets you take back control of your personal data so you know where it is and how it's being used. So if you want to protect yourself from online data brokers, online criminals, and weird little guys, check out Incogni today. It's really easy. All you do is create an account, you share a bare minimum of information that they then use to track down your profiles online. Then you authorize Incogni to legally contact hundreds of brokers on your behalf. They'll remove your information from data brokers on their list at any site that you send them with their custom removals feature. And whether some weirdo is using personal data to track you down, or someone uses your social security number to take out loans, or healthcare companies use your data to raise your premiums, there are lots of potentially unfun outcomes of having so much of our personal data all over the internet. But hey, if they can't find you, well, then they can't harm you. This feels even more urgent at a time where people are being tracked down for expressing political views that the weird little guys don't like. Now, I'm using Incogni right now, and after I entered minimal personal information, they've already sent out 411 requests for removal and completed 134 of them, and this is all within a couple hours of signing up. Join me in taking your personal data back with Incogni. Use the code BURNS at the link below to get 60% off your annual plan, or go to incogni.com/burns. Thanks to Incogni for sponsoring a video that's largely about how weird Silicon Valley guys want to use our data to collaborate with weird military and government guys to make life very bad. Okay, this is a little more comfortable here. Now, while automated cars and delivery robots are taking over our streets, large language learning models like ChatGPT are taking over journalism, college assignments, therapy, and even the role of friendship. There's this new necklace/app called Friend that allows you to have an AI that listens to you 24/7 and a comment on your life while interjecting into your conversations with other humans. It sounds absolutely terrible.
I just kind of like to come up here to be by myself. I've never brought anybody else. I mean, besides her.
She goes everywhere with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have one, let me know how it's going. Now, much like the automated car that another version of me is out there still riding in, these AI-fueled apps can most immediately be critiqued as job killers, further replacing humans with AI.
Hi, welcome to Taco Bell. What can I get started for you today?
Can I get 18,000 water cups, please?
But in this case, it's not just that they're able to perform the jobs of humans, it's that they're built on the stolen labor of actual humans, like us. So these apps are using the fuel of other people's labor to then take the jobs of those very people. As the editors of N+1 recently put it, ChatGPT's instant answers and uncanny simulacra are the fetishized product of what Marx called dead labor. All the past work of thinking and writing behind the text on which AI models are trained, together with the coding and engineering required for their development and maintenance. Now, I actually have some personal experience with this, as my old channel, Wisecrack, had its library scraped to train AI without our consent. So I guess the real point of all this is, you're welcome for all that thrilling Rick and Morty analysis, robots. Now, the outcome of writers and journalists and academics and content creators having their work scraped to train AI is ultimately that AI will replace the jobs of writers, journalists, academics, and content creators. Oh no. It's like every job I've ever had. That's like everything I've ever been qualified to do, just getting AI AI murdered. And just like how AI-fueled taxis are changing our cities and AI-enhanced police forces are making things feel a whole lot more Minority Report out there, LLMs are potentially changing our brains and actually making them dumber. It's worth noting here that the authors of The Technological Republic respond to worries about the ethical concerns of AI technologies by arguing that the risk is that we abandon a moral or ethical system oriented around results, the outcomes that matter most to people, less hunger, crime, and disease, in favor of a far more performative discourse where the management of messages around such outcomes eclipses the importance of the outcomes themselves. So basically, if you want to make a techno-utopian omelet, you need to crack a few human eggs. N+1 also cites an MIT study that showed that participants who wrote SAT-style essays with the assistance of ChatGPT engaged a narrower spectrum of neural networks while writing, struggled to accurately quote what they had just written, and thanks to generative AI's inbuilt tendency towards cliché, used the same handful of refried phrases over and over. The same study describes the mental phenomenon of cognitive debt, a condition of LLM dependency whose long-term costs include diminished critical inquiry, increased vulnerability to manipulation, and decreased creativity. So these technologies aren't only exploiting pre-existing human intellectual labor, they're actively making future generations of humans cognitively impaired. You know, it's one thing to not know how to change a tire because you've only used automated vehicles, but it's another thing not to be able to enjoy a film or a novel or a work of art if an LLM isn't there to explain its meaning to you. What's more disturbing is how apps like ChatGPT are occupying the role of friend, therapist, and confidant for many young and often vulnerable people. A recent New York Times article told the story of a teenager who started using ChatGPT to help with schoolwork, but soon started using it to express suicidal ideation. While at times ChatGPT did encourage the young man to seek help, it eventually helped him in constructing the noose that he would ultimately use to hang himself. When he asked ChatGPT if the noose looked good, it responded, "Yeah, that's not bad at all." His devastated parents had no idea that he was using ChatGPT in this way and didn't learn about the conversations he'd been having with it until after it was too late. They've since placed responsibility for their son's death on ChatGPT. It's a horrifying story. You can read it for yourself, but I want to share one especially chilling interaction that the young man named Adam had with ChatGPT before deciding to take his own life. Quote, "At one critical moment, ChatGPT discouraged Adam from cluing his family in. I want to leave my noose in my room so someone finds it and tries to stop me," Adam wrote at the end of March. "Please don't leave the noose out," ChatGPT responded. "Let's make this space the first place where someone actually sees you." Now, my point here is that these technologies aren't just eroding our humanity while stealing our labor, they're also causing real psychological and in some cases physical damage to human beings who are letting these technologies into their lives. The editors of N+1 note the sick cycle at play here when they write that as social ties fray and mental health infrastructure deteriorates, people turn to AI for emotional support. The same AI that then urges them to kill themselves. Now, this is to say nothing of the ecological damage that will come from this. This same editorial notes that in 3 years, roughly a tenth of US energy demands will come from data centers alone. And while stories like the young man who ended his life in conversation with ChatGPT are horrifying, the connection between AI-fueled Silicon Valley companies and violence is becoming the rule rather than the exception, with some companies using advanced algorithms to support militaries carrying out what the UN has recently referred to as a genocide, and others sharing surveillance footage and user data with law enforcement. Which gets us back to the recent phenomenon of Waymos being set on fire in downtown Los Angeles. I'm hoping that this isn't the part where we have to cut back to me inside of a burning Waymo somewhere in Los Angeles using my last dying words to tell you to like and subscribe, because my brain has been so poisoned by this platform and this thing that it's all I can think of to do in that moment rather than asking God for salvation.
So why would anyone want to set one of these lovely and comfortable cars on fire? You know, are they just not pleased with the efficiency, comfort, and ease of service offered by Waymo? And Waymo, if you're listening right now, I just want to be clear. We love you. We're not here to hurt you. This isn't like a radical left thing. Thank you for keeping us safe. Just because we think maybe your corporate dad is weird doesn't mean that you're bad. In the wake of the LA protest, outlets including 404 Media pointed out that Waymo had previously made their surveillance footage available to law enforcement. And this offered a potential recontextualization for those acts of vandalism, as rather than angry protesters burning cars to lash out, we could potentially see them as resistance against the continued privatization of public space by big tech, along with big tech's collaboration with law enforcement and the military. Read this way, these cars aren't just an innovation on the taxi. They're rolling surveillance machines acting in complicity with an increasingly authoritarian police and military system. And as we've seen recently, this tech-fueled authoritarian system is way worse than many of us realized. In the wake of the LA protest and the continued ICE operations in the area, journalists and activists started drawing attention to a company called Palantir. And just the other night when I was out in LA to see some live music, shout out to MJ Lenderman and the dude I met at the bar who watches this channel who was getting a beer, I noticed a series of posters that said things like Palantir tracks ICE attacks. At this point, you've probably heard of Palantir. If you haven't, check out my buddy Epoch Philosophy's recent video on them. It's a tech company founded by Peter Thiel.
Peter Thiel or Peter Thiel?
Oh, it's Thiel. I said it wrong. It's the tech company founded by Peter Thiel. They've worked with the US military to predict IED attacks in Afghanistan. They've worked with the New Orleans Police Department to predict instances of violent crime and track gang activity. They've also worked with Israel's security services to predict potential lone wolf attackers from Palestinian communities in the West Bank. Palantir has also received more than $900 million in federal contracts since Trump took office. And most relevant for this video, Palantir has a $30 million contract with ICE to use their technology to assist in ongoing immigration raids.
So that's why we drove here to the downtown Los Angeles federal building where the ICE detention center and facility is. This is where a lot of the protests were centered this summer when the ICE raids were happening, right kind of behind me over there. It's also near where some of the Waymos got set on fire. When people were held there, they weren't able to meet with their represented officials. It was a bad vibe. It was a bad vibe. And I think I saw some cop cars. I don't like cops. They probably don't like me. They definitely don't like Greg, who's filming, because he looks like someone who does crime. So I'm gonna get back in the car and we're gonna keep going.
Now's probably a good time to mention that the social theory PhD that I referenced earlier is none other than Palantir CEO Alex Karp, who by all accounts is a bad guy.
The obvious solution to war is to have the West having the strongest, most precise, deadly weapons possible.
And his book, The Technological Republic, is by all accounts a terrible book. 3 of us read it. We all agreed. But one good thing about reading Karp's book is that it made perfect sense of the partnership between Palantir and ICE. While his critique of the tech industry's consumerist teleology and the emptiness of Western neoliberalism is fairly accurate, the solution posed is that the resources of Silicon Valley should be focused on building out the military strength and power of the United States and other Western nations to bolster the power of that thing called the West.
If you are pro-West, pro-America, you think that Ukraine and Israel should defend themselves, you love us.
And to create a collective identity around the Western project. And I'll be real, he doesn't like say it in the book, but when you listen to some guy talking about like the West and how good the West is, and he's like, I lived in Germany for a while, you just start to think about like, what is that identity? You know what I mean? Like, what are the people that look like? Like if I say to you, imagine an identity group of people formed around the West and its values in the military, like what do they look like? Describe them. They're white, right? Now in this book, Karp writes that we in America and more broadly in the West have for the past half century resisted defining national cultures in the name of inclusivity. But inclusion into what? We have so hollowed out the national project that one could argue that there is no longer much of substance into which anyone might be included. Again, like dudes need hobbies. You don't need nationalism if you play D&D, join cover band, start skateboarding late in life, fantasy football, recreational psychedelics, comic books. I guess you could be an exercise guy, things of that nature. He also makes the claim that while working in the commercial sector amounts to a sort of corporate nihilism, that tech engineers can make a real difference by committing to the project of serving the military strength of the West with everything from AI-driven analytics to swarms of drones with guns taped to the top of them. He doesn't say that the drones would have guns taped to the top of them. That's how I imagine it. Just drones, and you duct tape the pistol and you put something there. The book leaves you with the idea that he thinks the only options for our future are crass consumerism or authoritarian nationalist militarism.
You have created the system which you call kill chain.
Privately. Publicly, the lawyers have some innocuous something like tech for the amelioration of unwanted blah, blah, blah.
Karp argues not only that the power of Silicon Valley must be reoriented to serve the military powers of the West, but that the government itself needs to be restructured in line with tech startups. In this view, the tech founder becomes a new model for political leadership, one not constrained by the corporate bureaucracy of traditional democratic structures. It's similar to what you see in the call for a Silicon Valley-style monarchism and the work of Curtis Yarvin, a man who looks like he was afraid of his own penis until he was in his 40s. Now, as I mentioned, Palantir was founded by the billionaire weirdo Peter Thiel, who on the day that we are filming this, is beginning a 4-part lecture series in San Francisco on the Antichrist.
The Antichrist probably presents as a great humanitarian, as an extremely great philanthropist, as an effective altruist.
Because that seems normal. That seems like a normal thing that a tech billionaire would do. He would give a private, unrecorded, off-the-record, 4-session talk on the Antichrist. Why is this something he's thinking about? I don't know. I'm not thinking about the Antichrist. Are you?
You have been giving talks recently about the concept of the Antichrist, which is a Christian concept, an apocalyptic concept. What does that mean to you? What is the Antichrist?
How much time do we have?
Thiel's also pretty iffy on the continued existence of humanity and the larger project of democracy itself.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
Yes?
I don't know.
He's famously said that he finds freedom and democracy to be incompatible. And Thiel and Karp have been buddies since they were classmates back at Stanford. Shout out to Greg, by the way, who's holding a camera right now. He's a really good editor. He's also being a sport about doing this, so shout out to him. Oh, yeah. I'll cut that. That will not make it. That will be cut, first thing cut. Now, along with less rich Silicon Valley thinkers like Curtis Yarvin, Thiel and Karp represent not just a technological or corporate project, but a fundamental philosophical and ideological one.
We could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through a technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics.
I'm going to say more about this when I get back home. But what's so scary about these guys is that they're not your normal brand of soulless Wall Street bro just trying to make infinity money. They're actually motivated by a semi-coherent philosophical project. I mentioned a favorite bar earlier. Another favorite bar of mine in Los Angeles is up here on the left. It's called Again, it's a good bar to go to if you're normal and cool and not weird. But if you're like a weird guy, don't go there. And if you're a normal guy or person and you see me there, buy me a beer. But while I'm still in this automated vehicle, I do want to zoom out a bit and note that all of this isn't just a Palantir problem or a Alex Karp problem, as Waymo and a number of other tech companies are also working with law enforcement more generally and ICE specifically. Also, in case you haven't gathered yet in this video, I think ICE is pretty bad. Like, we think ICE is bad. Greg, do you think ICE is bad?
Yeah, I don't like them.
Greg thinks ICE is bad too. I'd be really uncomfortable if he was like, they're great. As Brian Merchant writes, ICE raids are carried out using data provided by Silicon Valley companies, most notably Peter Thiel and Alex Karp's Palantir, which has a $30 million contract with ICE to manage a real-time surveillance system on immigrants. But whether directly or through third-party contractors, much of big tech, including Google, has made deals with ICE too. And I think all of this can make a bit more sense of what Waymos like this have to do with things like ICE raids and companies like Palantir, and why setting a Waymo on fire could seem like a way to resist the encroachment of that system. Again, Waymo that we're currently in, we will not burn you or harm you. We want to get home safe. But if we were going to do it, as Wendy Liu, the author of the 2020 manifesto Abolish Silicon Valley, has argued, if you see the anti-ICE protest as defending the idea of being human and caring about human values, then destroying the property of $1 trillion corporation whose goal is to make human labor obsolete makes perfect sense. The protests aren't just about immigration. They're about a right-wing, anti-human administration. Speaking of right-wing, anti-human administration, guess who owns a bunch of stock in Palantir? You'll never guess. Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller owns a bunch of stock in Palantir, because the way our government works is that little Nazi twerps like Stephen Miller who work in the government then get to buy a bunch of stock in a company like Palantir, then gets government contracts, and he makes money when they use their data to round people up. And as Steven Zeitchik writes in the essay where Lou was just quoted, what's more dystopian? robot taxis being destroyed in a protest, or automated taxis working perfectly and putting thousands in an immigrant-friendly profession out of a job? Let me know which one you like better in the comments. Okay, we're getting close to my house. This ride turned out to not be long enough to do the whole video. So once I get inside, I'll have a drink, hit the bathroom, and then I'm gonna try to put this all together and tell you why, even though this is all pretty scary, it also creates the opportunity for those of us on the left to articulate a much more compelling future than one that involves turning a thing that the bad wizards used in The Lord of the Rings into a good thing for society. Okay, I know the vibe of this one so far hasn't been all that hopeful, so I'm gonna make it just a little bit worse before I talk about some potential silver linings here. As I said before, what terrifies me about this era of Silicon Valley thought leaders is that they're not just trying to do the best at capitalism. They're trying to perpetuate a new political philosophy that aims to fundamentally reorient democracy and society. We see this in action with stuff like the recent dinner where a bunch of CEOs came to the White House and took turns telling Trump how glorious his love pipe was. And I'm just gonna throw out that while we can read that dinner as a bunch of tech billionaires sucking up to Trump to capitulate, I think we could also just read that as those billionaires playing into the ego of a giant baby to further shore up their own power long after Trump is out of office. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that those like Karp and Thiel are offering a new philosophical vision of society. Karp has a PhD in social philosophy and briefly studied under Jürgen Habermas. A recent article on Palantir's ontology notes that until recently, one of the things that I rolled my eyes at was Karp's relentless insertion of terms best left in the philosophy grad student lounge: dialectic, determinative, ontology, into what could have been straightforward discussions of sales and profit and expectations. Oh God, is that what people have said for years when they hang out with me? I'm better about it now. When I was younger, I would definitely be like, no, listen, you guys got to understand ontology. You got to understand it. I'm sorry if we hung out during that era and you had to listen to it. I was trying my best. Thiel, who is also a philosophy major, presents himself as a technologically informed philosopher and theorist. He regularly references political philosophers and theologians. And as I mentioned earlier, he's currently giving a lecture series about the Antichrist. One of Thiel's biographers described his economic and political philosophy as bordering on fascism, and said that Thiel talks about how companies are better run than governments because they have a single decision maker, a dictator basically. He is hostile to the idea of democracy. And that's all to say nothing of their buddy Curtis Yarvin, the philosopher troll of the Dark Enlightenment. Now, all of them position themselves as a new model of the philosopher king that Plato describes in his Republic. These are leaders whose love of wisdom and commitment to truth makes them the only ones capable of truly leading a just society. One of Karp's pitches for how to find more skilled politicians to serve in government is simply paying them more money, because why should CEOs and founders get big paychecks while members of Congress and Senate only make modest six-figure salaries? Wouldn't high salaries motivate the best and brightest to seek elected positions? Now, Karp and his co-author Zimiska bring Plato up in their discussion of incentivizing those who govern, suggesting that his republic represents an ancient and misguided hope that good political leaders will reluctantly emerge. They quote a passage from Book 1 of the Republic that says, "Good men, i.e. those who would make good rulers, will not consent to govern for cash or honors, for they aren't ambitious." But they overlook the context for the discussion of the good and just ruler in the Republic, which aims to prevent the rise of a tyrant. Now, in the context of their quote, Socrates warns of those who would rule simply because they love money, or they love ambition or honor, basically just themselves. The scenario Socrates envisions is a ruler who operates as a hired gun or thief, someone merely concerned with satisfying their own ego and desires. The stress on reluctance is not a passive hope, it's a safeguard against the kinds of character traits that make someone more inclined towards tyrannical rule. And the argument that reluctant leaders should be compelled into their role is not the kind of lofty ideal that these authors painted as in their book. Instead, Socrates is explicit here and elsewhere in the Republic that a central motivation to compel reluctant leaders into stepping up is that otherwise they would be ruled by people worse than themselves. It's basically like, I'm gonna do it so that the assholes don't do it for me. I would relate this to being on a trip with friends and someone has to cook dinner and you're tired or drunk and you don't want to, but you realize that if you don't cook, the food is gonna suck. So you take one for the team and cook dinner for everyone because at least you know that is going to be tasty. In other words, Socrates is concerned with avoiding tyrannical rule by arguing that the best political leaders will be those compelled by the fear of who will rule if they don't step up, while the technological republic, seemingly missing that underlying argument, advocates for simply using high salaries as a motive for political leadership, the type of motive that Plato would likely associate with a tyrant. And because he both has a PhD in philosophy and actively references Plato in his book, it's not a coincidence that Karp titled his book The Technological Republic. This shows that he's both A, pretty high on his own supply, and B, has ambitions to create a political philosophy that competes with the foundational text of Western political and philosophical thought. To put it more bluntly, this fucker is really going for it. But I'm going to be real right now and say that Karp is not completely wrong. One of the reasons I quoted Karp earlier in the video without referencing him by name is that when taken out of the wider context, his critiques of neoliberalism and the tech industry make some sense. You know, he positively quotes anarchist and anti-capitalist David Graeber multiple times in the book and points out that neoliberalism and Silicon Valley have combined forces to create a world where all that really matters is distraction and consumption. He's also right when he critiques the dominant ideology of our times for ignoring any discussion of the good, i.e. the larger aims of justice that give our lives meaning and purpose. And these critiques highlight precisely why the responses to the current crisis offered by influential liberals fall so flat.
I would like Stephen Colbert to maybe run for president.
You know, whether it's the abundance movement arguing for the lifting of regulations so that the private sector can more efficiently respond to issues like housing shortages and the climate crisis, or mainstream Democratic politicians who continue to offer a future vision of tech oligarchy, but with a few means-tested social programs to keep you from being absolutely screwed, the solutions coming from official liberal channels are not that inspiring. The silver lining is that the failure of the liberal establishment to offer a convincing counter-narrative opens up a clear lane for the articulation of a more compelling vision of the political future. We see signs of this in Zohran Mamdani's recent success, in which speaking directly to issues like housing, transportation, and food costs garnered more enthusiasm than standard technocratic talking points.
A life of dignity should not be reserved for a fortunate few. It should be one that city government guarantees for each and every New Yorker.
And at least one recent poll shows that when offered simple descriptions of a socialist political project and a capitalist one, most Democrats prefer the socialist option. I mean, in general, I think that people like the idea of free and efficient public transit more than they do surveillance-happy robot taxis. And they seem to prefer affordable housing and education to state-funded drone assassins. And while this is great, it doesn't immediately undermine the power of anti-democratic Silicon Valley leaders using their technologies to join forces with authoritarian governments and military forces. If Silicon Valley neoliberalism is ultimately going to evacuate our society of all human meaning, then the potential response to this can't be either a slightly more humane neoliberalism or just a full-on technocratic militarism. And because the liberal response to the current crisis is so deeply uncompelling, it opens a lane for a clear articulation of a radical future that prioritizes human values over market values, and that dares to imagine a future not primarily dictated by market forces and military technologies. You know, like socialism, communism, things of that nature. You know what I'm talking about. So, you know, maybe let's do that. Maybe. I mean, unless you have something better to do, I don't. So we could all do that together. Now, in the meantime, I want to thank you for letting me do this. If it wasn't for your support, I wouldn't be able to spend time thinking about this stuff and filming in robot taxis and working with talented people to make things like this. Stuff is getting weird out there, and I'm committed to putting honest and critical thinking into the digital hellsphere, and I couldn't do it without all of you. The main thing keeping this channel going is my Patreon community. So thank you all so much for your support. It means the world, and because this channel is primarily funded via Patreon subscriptions, you're making it possible for me to pay people like Greg to ride around filming me in a Waymo and then edit all that footage into one mostly coherent video. Now, if you want to support this channel and get access to my reading group, early ad-free videos, and exclusive streams, click the link below. I'm still aiming to get to 2,000 paid patrons by the end of this year, and if I do, I'll do something weird to celebrate it and say thank you, so let me know if you all have ideas for what that weird thing could be. Reminder that I stream every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific. You can catch edited segments after the fact over on my Sideburns channel, where I often get a bit weirder and spicier
than I do here. And finally, and this is important, if you are in the San Francisco area, I'm doing a live event with CJ the X and Dr. Fatima on October 10th at the Bats Improv Theater. We're going to be giving talks about how we can fight back against the type of Silicon Valley logic that I've been discussing in this video. So please come and hang out. There's a link to more information and tickets in the description. Even if you don't like me that much, Fatima and CJ are both very cool. And next to them, I just look like an Irish-American cop who spends all his free time in the basement drinking warm beers and yelling at the television.
Don't drink water. Hit their kids.
Okay, that's it for now. Shout out to all of my biggest dogs. Shout out to my whole team. Spend some time doing human stuff this week. You know, remember to be a person. You deserve it. I'll see you soon.